Okay, I'm recording, and it's with Les Drent, and what is it, the February 9th, 2023, and we're driving down to a marketing gathering for cigars and bourbon. Is that right? From your farm. Okay, so thank you for offering to tell us your story, and please feel free to start wherever you like.
Okay. So I think probably the first place to start is just I grew up in New London, New Hampshire, and went to school in New Hampshire. Then I spent a year up at St. Johnsbury Academy, and then was always very into sports. I went off to college in Ohio, College of Wooster. Really didn't have any real direction academically. It was just, I think to be honest to say that, going to college was sort of something that the family expected both my brother and I to do, so we just went to college, not with any particular goal in mind. Unlike, I think probably my wife was different in that way, and my daughter's certainly different, but that's the way I rolled, and off to school I went, and I spent my years at Worcester really just going through the motions of getting out of there and getting a degree, a bachelor's degree. Years later, after I met my wife, and she has higher degrees than I do, along with her friends, and jokingly, she would somewhat introduce me at times as he majored in his first language. My wife is from Vietnam, so English is her second language. Came to the U.S. at age 15 and had to learn English and learn to communicate more in math. She's a math head. But yeah, I got a bachelor's degree in English and left college and thought I would head west. Lived in Los Angeles with a friend for, I believe, a few months, and was going to start a career in advertising. Since I figured that was something that would easily fit with my use of words, and that really didn't work out too well, and I decided that I was going to go to Hawaii and live with the sister, not live with her, but meet up with the sister of a guy that I kind of fooled around with hockey when I was back in high school, and went out there and I got a job. Gene managed the Aloha Theater Cafe in Kainaliu, so I got a job waiting tables through Gene, and I lived on a little coffee farm, and then during the day I worked at an ad agency in Kona called Ad Studio Kona, and I worked there, so I was sort of still pursuing maybe a career in advertising and doing something with that. And this was back before the internet, before a lot of the digital media started happening, so it was a lot of still cut and paste to create advertisements. So that was
That's on the Big Island?
That was on the Big Island.
How'd you get to the Big Island?
I flew from LA into Hilo, and then
how'd you choose that?
I think I chose the Big Island. We had gone to Hawaii when I was a kid. My dad was in Vietnam, so we'd spent my 1 year as a child, and then we'd gone back there on a few different family vacations to Hawaii, so we had some familiarity, but never been to the Big Island. I think I chose the Big Island because of its diversity. You've got snow-capped mountains down to black sand beaches and everything in between with climate zones, and I thought it just sounded the most appealing to me, so I chose the Big Island. And I had no interest at the time in coffee, didn't drink coffee, but I wound up living on a little coffee farm in Captain Cook on the Big Island, which is above Kealakekua Bay. So living in Kealakekua, Captain Cook area, lived in a small coffee farm, and spent my days at Ad Studio Kona, and I spent my evenings at Aloha Theater Cafe waiting tables. It was a communal tip system, so I realized working that job that I definitely got a feeling for how would you say, I don't want to call it left or right, as far as socialism and capitalism. But basically, at the end of the night, all the tips would go into one jar, and then it'd be split up evenly between the wait staff, which was typically, I think, maybe 4 of us that handled the cafe. So if I had a lot more tables than one other person, you would still get even amount of tips between everybody. So I learned early on, I was like, wow, this isn't gonna really work for me. I realized that I was probably more on the side of capitalism and wanting to work hard and earn as much as I could on my own. So that's how I spent it. Met a girlfriend. She was a baker at that cafe. Wound up spending 8 years on and off with her. And from that point,
What age were you?
This was 1991.
And you'd graduated when?
Graduated in 91, so I got there 91, 92 was when I was on the Big Island. And I remember one night I was joking around, and I had picked up the phone during one of my shifts, and I had answered the phone, "Hello, this is George Bush, Republican." And the fellow that owned the cafe was a Cornell guy, Alan. Old Alan. And he didn't think it was very funny that I had answered the phone George Bush. I'm not sure if it was because George was a Republican and Alan was very not Republican. So anyway, he had come in the next day and he called me into his office and he sat me down and he said, "So tell me, Les," he says, "what do you really want to do? What do you really want to do, for work?" Because I can tell he wasn't amused by me picking up the phone and answering that at his business. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I kind of want to go out and I want to start a magazine." I was in English and, kind of a wordsmith. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that." And that was his way of firing me. So I think that was the first job I'd ever been fired from in my life. So that was the way that I wound up leaving that. And I said, okay, wow, maybe I guess it's time to go start a magazine. I was still working down at Ad Studio Kona. But what I started doing at Ad Studio Kona, I got this idea that I needed money to buy a computer. Because I'm going to start a magazine, I need to be able to, I need to get a computer to do this. And it was right around the Apple IIe era. I did my senior thesis on PageMaker, one of the first versions of Word processing for Apple on that side. So I wound up with this idea that I would do old-fashioned plantation portraits down on the boardwalk at the Kona Inn shopping village. So that is basically when you go out west, you go to those places and they dress you up in cowboy outfits and they take your picture and then they do the sepia tone process and they give you back a photograph that looks like you in the old west with the guns and tinted and all that. So I got the idea that I would do that to earn money to buy a computer to start a magazine. So I went to the local Salvation Armies. I went to a yard sale. I bought a little photo enlarger. I bought muumuus, which are Hawaiian dresses. I bought a bunch of straw hats and I stuffed some burlap coffee bags filled with paper, and I set up shop on the Kona Inn Shopping Village boardwalk. And I would dress up tourists in the coffee plantation garbs, and then I would go back into the dark room. They would pay me, and they would trust me to send their photographs to them on the mainland. And I would go back there and I would process in this little closet, the Kona Inn Shopping Village, their photographs, tint them, and then for an extra $10, I would put it in a cheap frame that I got from Long's Drugs, and I would send that back to them, and I made money. So
this is hard to do before digital.
This was hard to do. This is all done by hand. You would buy the chemicals and process the film and make the prints and out of the old Ectolor paper, and that's how I did it. And I made enough money to buy my first Apple IIe computer, which I set up in our bedroom because we lived in a one-bedroom studio in Kona, right above Hamburger Hill, they called it, in Kailua, Kona. So I set up the Apple IIe computer, got a scanner, and I started laying out a magazine. And I still didn't really have a lot of money, but I had enough money that I could figure out how I would get the first magazine printed and get it out on the street. And I had
How'd you learn how to do the photographing?
I learned how to do the photographing simply from the processes that were down. But I actually started using Zach's photo, a South African guy that set up called Zach's Photo. So there were different photo processing shops around the tourist area on the Big Island. So I actually started just shooting the pictures, and then I would bring it to Zach's. I wasn't using my photo larger for that, my equipment. I transitioned into using Zach's. So I would take pictures of the different areas in the Big Island, and the waterfalls and the lava fields, and I studied the history a bit, and I created the first magazine in 1993 off this Apple IIe computer. Now, obviously everybody knows how you make money on making a magazine is through advertising, but I didn't know any of the businesses on the Big Island, and how I would attract advertising dollars because I had nothing. So I had the idea that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the whole magazine. I'm going to get all the advertisers from the entire island. I think I probably had like maybe 80 some advertisements in that magazine, maybe more, maybe 100. And I literally went out and I went to these people and I designed and made their advertisements, took their logos, scanned them in. It was a single color publication, so one color, very easy. And I created this magazine in PageMaker, and I put everybody's ad in there and didn't ask them for one penny. And I said, I'm gonna do this magazine, and I'm gonna print everybody's ads for free, with the hope that once they see the magazine, that they'll sign up and they'll pay me for advertising the next go around. And people were like, "You're crazy. They're never gonna pay."
Do you have any copies of the original?
I do. I have all the originals right on the website. You can go to coffeetimes.com and you can see the first magazine I ever published in April of 1993. I think the date actually says March, but I made a mistake and I forgot to, because I didn't get it out in March. I got it out in April. I should have changed the date to April. So the pages say April, but the front cover says March.
Those are the ones on your bed right now?
Yeah. So anyway, so people didn't think they were going to really pay me for advertising the next time around. I had a whole ad rate sheet of what they would pay after they see the magazine. Well, I put the first one out. I distributed, I think it was 10,000 copies around the Big Island, dropped it off at all the hotels and tourist spots and restaurants, and people loved it, and people signed up, and I began receiving money for the magazine in the next issue, in a way I was in the publishing world. So I did it for free. I put myself out there. I think I paid Hawaii Hochi Press. I believe the printing of that magazine cost me $4,000 or $5,000 to print that magazine. 10,000 copies. I believe it was 24 pages. So it was 6 11 by 17s, 4 pages per. And I believe that was my first issue, and most of it was advertising, and I put in some stories. You can go back and look at the stories I did. It was probably
a lot of money you were making your money from the photograph.
Yeah. It cost me. I forget how much the scanner and the Apple IIe and the monitor cost, but I'm guessing it was probably around $2,000-$3,000. So I'm thinking I'm all in for probably less than $10,000 to do this, the first issue. So, well, that's you live and learn, and that was one of the things I learned. So the first magazine rolled out in '93. It was a monthly publication. I had a 1980 Volkswagen Vanagon, and then I would pile the magazines in there after I got them back, and I would drive around the island once a month, and I would circulate all these magazines, and then I would get to work on the next one. I'd have basically, about 3 weeks to get the next magazine together.
Did they give you the ads ready to print?
I had to design them, so I took their logo off of business cards, off of their own rack cards, and I would scan them, and then I would lay out, and I'd ask them what information they wanted in the ad, like Body Glove Hawaii or Atlantis Submarines or Kilauea Lodge, all the, you can go in and look at all these. So I basically got the information that they'd want to see appear, with the whole idea, this isn't going to cost you a penny. I'm going to do it all for free.
You did this for how many companies?
I will have to go back and count the ads in the magazine. It's all online.
You said 75?
I'm guessing it was a lot, because I had a lot of small advertisements, and then I also went out and grabbed all the bed and breakfasts that were operating. So I had a bed and breakfast page on there that advertised all the bed and breakfasts, and they were literally just a few lines of text and their address and their phone number.
And you put this together in 1 month?
Well, no, it took me a few months to put the first magazine together. I had to get more proficient at PageMaker as well. So I had to learn PageMaker more than just putting text and a few photos in. I really had to learn graphic design. So yeah, that's what I did. You're young and you sat in the corner of the bedroom and did this on I had a 2x12 that was my desk, and I had the computer and the scanner on there and everything plugged in. So anyway, I figured out how to get it to print and put it out. It wasn't perfect, but it did the trick, and people were impressed enough that they signed up and started advertising with me. So now the idea with Coffee Times was that I was going to make the money as a visitor publication where I would be appealing to tourists and I would get people into tourist related businesses. Now at the time, specialty coffee was just coming in to its being, right? Starbucks, this was early 90s. So Starbucks was just starting to launch and starting to drive this industry of specialty coffee. And I wow, I live in specialty coffee country with Kona coffee. It had always been a renowned region for coffee in the world, and even though Kona was always considered a master blend coffee where it was a premium bean that you could mix with other beans that were less quality and make the coffee taste better, so it was never sold exclusively as 100% Kona coffee. And at that time, any advertisers, the magazine was called Coffee Times because in trying to sell tourism advertising with all the restaurants and the tour ships and the submarine rides and the snorkeling and dive shops, I really wanted to promote agriculture. I spent time in Ohio in college, and I really did appreciate learning and living around the Amish people that were out in Holmes County, Ohio. So I had a real interest in supporting and promoting agriculture in Kona, and I figured I could do this through Coffee Times in the magazine, and also be promoting the Kona coffee industry that was just starting to blossom. So in the fall, I realized that I did not have the coffee industry, the small coffee producers, the small independent mom and pop, ex-hippies, people that had moved down there, didn't really have the money to advertise in my magazine. So I had the idea that, okay, what I'll do is I will start selling their coffee. So I put my first ad in my magazine, and I became my own advertiser, and I had a full page ad. And this is amazing to think that Kona coffee in my magazine sold for anywhere from $9.95 up to $11.95 per pound for Kona coffee. Today, 2023, we sell the same coffee for around $55 a pound. So it's amazing to see where the industry has come in the 30 years. But anyway, I got the idea that I would sell Kona coffee out of my magazine, 100% Kona.
What kind of a markup was that for you? They were selling.
I bought green coffee at the time for, I believe, around $4 or $5 a pound green. Then you'd have to roast. You lose 20% in the roaster, and then you would tack on. You'd have to add in the bag costs and bagging it. But
you did that?
Yeah.
You processed it?
Yeah. Well, at first, what I did is I bought roasted coffee and packaged it. But very soon after that, I was given a 5-pound Civets coffee roaster. Dr. Civets from Corvallis, Oregon, developed these small coffee roasters. They were electric hot air coffee roasters. And my friend Andy Roy, who is actually deceased now, was a very, very good old dear friend of mine in the Kona coffee industry. And he owned Bayview Farms with his wife Rosalind, who was from the Philippines. And Andy Roy was from New Hampshire. So Andy and I obviously hit it off really well. He owned Bayview Farms down in Captain Cook, and he gave me my first coffee roaster. But how would I get paid for this? Because there was no internet. Nobody was able to take mail order credit cards at that point, right? I had no way to process credit cards. So once again, I took a leap of faith, and I said, okay, I'm not going to take credit cards. I'm simply going to send you the coffee. I'm going to send my little paper bill in there, and you're going to send me a check for the coffee once you got it. How many times do you think I actually didn't receive a check for the coffee that I sent to people? Any guess?
Less than 1%.
I never once got stiffed. Never once did someone not send me money for the coffee and the shipping to send them the coffee.
That's like the trust, the faith.
The faith, the trust.
type rentals, things like that.
Yep. So I never once. And then finally, a gentleman came along, and he saw what was happening in the coffee industry in Kona with these small farms, and realized that there was a need for these people to try to find a way to process credit cards. Okay, so what happened is that American Express, the guy who worked for American Express, he brought me this little machine, the swipe machine. Remember the ones that you used to swipe over with the print? Well, we had no card because so what they would start doing is they would write their credit card number on the order form in my magazine. They would put it in an envelope and mail it to me, and then I would open the envelope, and it was so fun. I'd go to the post office, P.O. Box 1092 in Captain Cook, and I'd get my mail and had all these letters for people wanting to buy Kona coffee, and they would write their American Express number in there, and then I had a generic card that he gave me, an American Express card, without the number across there, so I would swipe that in, and then I would literally write the number in there, and then I would get all these receipts bundled up, and every week I would send them over to Honolulu to this guy, and he worked for American Express, and he would process these payments, right? And then I would get money sent back to my bank account. So that's how I transacted. I had to like trust that this whole thing was going to work with taking in credit card numbers, writing them on these slips, bundling them up, sending them over to them weekly. They would tally them up, and then I would get money put in my Bank of Hawaii bank account. And I actually went out and bought a 24 station bindery system in A.B. Dick, and I would collate and do the whole production of the whole entire magazine inside of this old macadamia nut shed that would shake when I had all the machines running. And I also roasted my Kona coffee out of this shed as well. So I had Kona coffee roasting in the air. I had the fumes from the printing machine and making my magazine in there, and it was quite an operation. But I was generating money, and I was really killing myself printing this magazine all day and all night, and then getting it out there, driving it around the island and circulating it. And I really did drive myself crazy with it. I didn't quite have a nervous breakdown at that point, but I was working so much that I wound up, was it end of 95, 96, I wound up just pulling the plug on it and taking a sabbatical and really reevaluating everything that I was doing. It wasn't long. I took, I think, a few weeks to a month off, went back to the mainland, started looking at everything that I was doing and how I was running things. And I decided that I was going to change the magazine to being a quarterly publication, but because I realized that most of the money I was making was coming now from the coffee business that I was running with the mail order, and that was a very tangible thing. All I would have to do is buy the green beans, roast them, package them, and ship them. And I said, this is much easier than trying to run a magazine and advertising. And this was right around 95, where the internet just started kicking in, and there was the first beginning of pressure on print publications, with everything, people starting to look towards the internet in a way to communicate. So around that time, I got the idea that I would change the magazine and I would have someone else print it. All I would do is the graphic design. And from 96 to 98, I started running my magazine in a different way, and I started really focusing on the coffee side of the business and selling coffee. And I was also selling cut flowers from the Hilo side of the island, and I started selling macadamia nuts and chocolates. And I really started realizing that my future was probably in selling goods from Hawaii through the mail order. So that's where my focus was. The magazine I took less interest in that. In 98, I decided that I was going to take the magazine and I was going to move over to the island of Kauai, because the coffee industry had become so saturated with people coming into Kona. We had the .com bubble burst. I don't know if you remember that, in 1998. We had a lot of people that were very wealthy that came down to the Big Island and bought up small farms and started running small coffee operations and private labels. And I said, wow, I'm going to get just killed in this industry now. I wasn't really just the only guy on the block. People were actually buying land and starting specialty coffee farms, and it became sort of like a Sonoma or Napa Valley of the coffee world. Everybody was rushing down there to do this. So I got the idea that I would move over to Kauai, separate myself from the Kona coffee industry a little bit.
How'd you pick Kauai?
I had friends over there. Once again, I had Bill and Ginger, who owned a cafe over there, had said, you need to come over here. There's nobody doing coffee except for Kauai Coffee is just starting. They were a big giant plantation that was machine harvested, but it really didn't have much to do with the specialty coffee industry at the time. But I just looked at that as being, okay, new horizons. I can easily ship the green coffee beans from Kona over there, and I can run my roasting operation from the island of Kauai. It was really very easy to ship over green beans and to do that. And I would run my magazine. I hired someone to deliver the magazines around the Big Island, so they would run around the island and do that. Andrew Nisbet, who actually co-worked for me because he also started developing at that time, I think 95, 96 was when we first put out our first internet page for Coffee Times. So I met Andrew at Sack and Save. He was a checkout clerk running the cash registers at the local grocery store, and he was also dabbled in the internet and things of the computer world. And he said, well, here, why don't I try to put up a website for you, you know? And that was the advent of the internet and people starting putting websites up. So by 98, I think I had a website up. I was generating more income from the internet, from internet sales. I had actually been able to get a merchant processor, so I was able to punch in my numbers on a digital machine and batch total at the end of the day and have money go into so I didn't have to do the American Express swipe the cards, mail the batches over. I was able to start processing credit cards at the time. Mail order became a kind of a thing, you know, in the U.S. So everything kind of built around the advertising and selling of Kona coffee, macadamia nuts, cut flowers, and all that. So I moved over to Kauai, and I started running my business in that way. And it worked out pretty well. I was making a decent living, and I wasn't having the hardship of having to print the magazine. I donated my printing press and the binder system to the local high school in the Kona, and I just walked away from it.
You mentioned cut flowers. You mean you're shipping those?
Yeah, I actually I had someone drop shipping the flowers from a farm in Hilo. I went through a few different suppliers. I actually sold cases of papaya as well. From Molokai to the mainland. So people would buy their orchids and anthurium bouquets, and they would ship the flowers off. I had pictures in the magazine of these different arrangements. I think I called them Princess Kaiolani, Queen Liliuokalani, and they could buy whatever level of arrangements they wanted to out of the magazine, and then I would send the order over to the tropical flower farm in Hilo, and they would box everything up and ship them off to the mainland. So I was also in the flower business.